Hello, my name is Tia, also known as Costume Fiend because I'm both evil and excessively fond of dressing up. The excessively fond of dressing up part is why, for me, I don't really restrict wearing costumes to Halloween. However, that doesn't mean I don't have a separate affection for this time of year. September is absolutely Halloween Eve to me. I am one of those people. So I feel like it makes sense for me to talk about things I enjoy rewatching during this time of year, starting with a movie I know a lot of people don't really like or have mixed feelings about, and that is the 2003 Haunted Mansion movie. I remember when I watched it for the first time in a while after a few years. After not thinking about it much, I'd absorbed other people's negative feelings and was kind of surprised to realize I actually enjoyed the movie this go around. Generally speaking, I'd like to think that I form my opinions based on my preferences and try not to let other people's opinions change whether or not I enjoy things. So my Haunted Mansion rewatch made me kind of reevaluate that a bit. The basic premise of the film is this. It's based on the Disney ride of the same name, just like the Pirates of the Caribbean series. It focuses on the Evers family and the night they spend in a haunted mansion with a mysterious owner and a creepy butler. The reason they're there is because the parents, Sarah and Jim Evers, are realtors. It's pretty simple, and that's all it really needs to be for just a Halloween Disney flick. I think one of the criticisms that got stuck in my head was that Eddie Murphy, who plays Jim Evers, was too over the top in this, and that it didn't fully match the rest of the movie's tone. I can sort of understand where people are coming from with that, but when I think about other popular and well loved Halloween movies, I don't feel like that criticism really holds up. I mean, people love how campy the performances are in Hocus Pocus, and I've never heard fans of that movie accuse Bette Midler of doing too much or say they think Sarah Jessica Parker should have toned it down. Um, in fact, I feel like a lot of people who like the movie kind of point out how funny it is, how much the witch actresses are like playing it up so much, and the kid actresses are taking the movie much more seriously. And I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but it is interesting to note that the 2003 Haunted Mansion movie is sort of one of the only movies of its kind that kind of focuses on a black family. So while yes, Mr. Murphy is possibly doing the most, it is technically a kids movie, and it does feel like that's the energy that they hired him for. Also, on a personal level, I think his reactions were definitely more realistic to what the average guy would be thinking and feeling when put through all of those scenarios. It doesn't really disrupt the tone so much as highlight the differences between how people in Gothic romances act versus how a man who thinks he's in a slice of life about reconnecting with his family would act. And yeah, I would say the subplot or secondary plot of the film classifies as the Gothic romance, and is the reason I enjoy rewatching it. I alluded to it a bit earlier, but the Gothic romance genre tends to stick to having pretty pale leads. I enjoy some of them and don't really have any desire to change things, like Crimson Peak, as an example, has a mostly white cast, and it's fine with me. I'm actually thinking of talking about Crimson Peak next week alongside Mexican Gothic. For me, I usually want representation with more options. Like the more options, the better. I don't necessarily need one thing to fulfill all the stuff. In the original Haunted Mansion movie, Sarah Evers pretty much fits the basic requirements for the quintessential gothic horror lead. She's sweet, she cares about her children, and she's a bit of a romantic. She also happens to look exactly like the owner of the mansion's long lost love. The usual. Slightly funny, if only to me, but the actress that plays Sarah is actually British. I'd always thought that the actress's cadence was a little bit off, and while it didn't bother me, it was something I'd noticed. So finding out that she was actually British made her voice make sense to me. And I low-key wonder if they chose someone British solely because Sarah's lookalike Elizabeth had an accent. If so, the idea that they didn't think an American actress could pull off a decent enough British accent for only a few minutes worth of dialogue is kind of hilarious. Anyway, back on topic, I think Sarah slash Elizabeth and Mr. Gracie, who's the owner of the mansion, had a good chemistry, and I think the way they showed the backstory at the beginning of the film was rather bold, considering it's, again, a Disney children's film. The hanging moment was somewhat explicit, all things considered. I totally get the desire for the whole movie to have that energy, but like I said, I don't mind the father reconnecting with his family element, partly because I think they actually did a good job with that plot line. Sometimes what's annoying about that storyline is that it doesn't actually do justice to any of its characters. Speaking of, sibling characters, for example, can be tricky because it's not just about one child actor, but two or possibly more. And there's definitely a tendency to play out how much they dislike each other or clash in a way that for me can be a bit much. Not that siblings don't fight or act like that, but I've always gotten along well with my sister more often than not, so I can appreciate it when it's a more subdued performance. Uh, Michael and Megan, the two kids, weren't best friends, but like they had each other's backs when it mattered, and I like that. I particularly like Michael's character development, going from being unable to kill a spider and having his father give him the usual "you gotta man up" speech, to his father ending up in a situation where he had to tell him it's okay to be afraid sometimes because he himself was currently afraid, and that allowed Michael to face his fears and help save them. Seeing a more human side to your parents, and in this case specifically your father as a son, I think is sometimes more helpful than thinking that your parents are invisible because you can't really live up to that. This is partly what Jim comes to understand, and again, since it's for a kids' movie, I'm fine with that being part of the story, even if the ghost stuff is definitely the more interesting part. Overall, I think the mausoleum scene in particular, where that stuff kind of comes to a head, was well done, and the special effects for it definitely look pretty cool. I think they hold up pretty well in general, overall, all things considered. Also, going back to the plot, on a sociological note, there's a lot to be said about the heavily implied to be racist butler having more of an issue with the romance between Edward and Elizabeth than the wealthy Edward himself. A conversation for a different kind of video, though, just something worth noting. Also, as an aside, I guess I think it's also worth noting, in the spirit of what I did last week with the Rotel Dorado, there is a technically, I guess, Romani fortune teller type character in this movie, and they do use the G word. I don't think a lot of people really understand that that's a slur, and especially at the time this movie came out, that was still, I guess, a kind of popular way of going about that. That trope obviously is always loaded as well, but yeah, it is what it is. And I mean, I enjoy Jennifer Tilly as an actress, so yeah. The use of the word aside, they didn't go too heavily into the, stereotype fortune teller thing. But anyway, as far as how this movie compares to the ride, I think, like the Pirates of the Caribbean, it only does so in small ways. Now, to be clear, I've only ridden the Florida Haunted Mansion Disney Park ride once, and that was like years ago. I'm not like a super fan of the ride, and I don't know all the lore behind it. Uh, Personally, I think if you're going to adapt something like a theme park ride into a film, it does make some sense to focus on a simple slash original story and add in the right elements as Easter eggs and have some of the themes sprinkled in here and there. In my opinion, going for too much fan service is only good in theory. That might please some fans after the first few watches, but that doesn't really make it a good movie in the long term. And again, this is obviously not a perfect film, but I think that overall, like I said, some of the critiques of it were a bit unwarranted given what other movies that were popular during the time of year or are doing, like tonally and theme wise. I don't think it's more campy or has more whiplash than other films like Hocus Pocus, and as a Halloween girly who can't always do certain types of horror, I appreciate the representation in a more palatable storyline and something that kids can enjoy. I'd of course love to have a more serious blacklit gothic romance, and I'm definitely interested in knowing if other people feel the same or if this movie is still a skip for you. Like I said earlier, my next video is definitely going to get slightly more into the Gothic Romance genre, using Crimson Peak and Mexican Gothic as examples. But yeah, other than that, you can leave a like if you liked, subscribe for more nerdy rambling, and as always, have a good one.